Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
So new patients are down and you can't figure out what's going on, or maybe it's production, collections, or profitability. Or you might find yourself unable to hire for a specific position. And not to sound cliche, but I've been on a steady diet of these problems for most of my career, especially when working with newer clients. Which brings up the question, what would we here at MGE do, or what action would we take when a client brings up one of these types of issues? While the solutions may be different for each of the problems, the general course of action we take would be almost the same. And it would begin by figuring out what the actual cause or reason is for the problem. The operative word being actual. And I say this as this is where most people go wrong. Instead of figuring out what's really going on, people latch on to the wrong reason or just justify non-performance and nothing changes. For example, I can have a new patient problem and I'm not getting any. I decide that the problem is my marketing, which in a lot of cases, people just do that. They make a knee-jerk decision. Oh, my marketing's not working. My staff don't like it or something like this. And they stop doing it. And things start to get worse. I've seen this happen plenty. And a more thorough investigation reveals that the marketing was actually getting plenty of calls, but the receptionist was mishandling the calls and only converting 10% of them. So that was the actual problem. Had you found that out in the beginning, if this were me, I could have trained or replaced my receptionist. Conversion would have gone up along with new patients. Or let's say case acceptance isn't going very well. And as a result, my schedule's empty. I could look at this arbitrarily and decide that patients can't afford treatment or the economy is bad, and nothing changes. I just have to learn to live with it. And, I'll see people do this. One or two patients might say, oh, I can't afford that, or two or three people get disapproved, and those two or three or those one or two become everybody, or lots. When I hear words like lots, many, in reports as to why something isn't working, it's one of my pet peeves. I like exact. 3 patients didn't get approved. My next question usually is, out of how many? Maybe 20. Okay, well, that's not half bad. If it's 3 out of 4, well, we got a problem, you see. So ultimately, it's easy to identify that there are no new patients or that the schedule's empty, but this ability to determine what's really going on behind all of this or any other problem you may be facing is a skill set that can be the difference between a failing or wildly successful practice, business, or organization for that matter. And it's with that idea in mind that I'm doing this week's episode. And while it's unrealistic that in a half-hour podcast I'd be able to roll out every tool we use here at MGE to help a client overcome these types of issues, I can share 2 big items or management tools that I use and many other team members here use to get you on the right road to potentially solve quickly at least 50% of the issues you may be facing on a day-to-day basis. So what are these tools? Well, 2 of them. 1, monitoring change, and 2, something we call the cycle of production. Now, if you're familiar with the MGE program, you know that a large portion of our curriculum comes from the Hubbard management system developed by L. Ron Hubbard. Mr. Hubbard spent close to 30 years researching this system, and it consists of millions of words and numerous volumes of reference material and covers just about anything you might conceive of with regards to running or managing and scaling an organization, communication, sales, how to become more organized, efficient, statistic management, financial planning, strategic planning. I could go on. And these 2 tools I'll be covering come directly from Mr. Hubbard's works. So let's start with the first one, monitoring change. So you have an area that was doing well, let's say, and then all of a sudden, or not so sudden, it isn't. New patients were humming along between 40 or 50 a month, and now they're crashed, and this month looks like you're going to end up in the 20s. What's your next step? Well, Mr. Hubbard explains. Here's what he says. He says, when statistics change radically for better or for worse, look for the last major alteration or broad general action just before it, and it is usually the reason. So I'll read that one more time. When statistics change radically for better or for worse, look for the last major alteration or broad general action just before it, and it is usually the reason. And he gives an example. He says, example, letters out statistic falls and falls. In investigating, look for the last major change in that area and, if possible, cancel it, and the statistic will then rise. Let us say that just at the top of the drop down, the third week in November, the sales and marketing department was given new dictation equipment. Take it away and restore the old arrangement and routing pattern that was in use with it, and sit back and see what happens. The statistic will probably recover. So we have this basic concept here. As he says, when statistics change radically for better or for worse. What would be radically? Well, we have our definition of extremely or drastically. If we had a statistic change that was radical, it would be large in magnitude. So if we were getting 40 new patients a month, 40 new patients, and all of a sudden they go to 38, that would not be defined as a radical change. But if we went from 40 to 50 to 20, that's large, that's big in magnitude, that's extreme or drastic. So when statistics change radically for better or for worse. So we have this big drop. We're now going to look for the last major alteration or board journal action just before it, and it's usually the reason. So let's say right before the drop, and obviously, number one, you have to be keeping statistics in order to do this. If you don't keep statistics, you're not going to be able to spot radical changes, right? Ideally, you're keeping statistics on a weekly basis. You look for the last big alteration that got made. Maybe you switched up your PPC campaign a week before the drop or 2 weeks before the drop, or you stopped sending out a mailer that you always sent out, or your receptionist wanted to become your dental assistant, so you hired somebody new and put them on the front desk, and your receptionist is now assisting. That's a major change. Okay, that's a major change. So how would we fix this? We would just revert the change and watch the statistic revert. So, or I said revert twice there, but we'd revert the change. We'd go back to our old arrangement, okay? So we'd put our receptionist back on the front to train up the new receptionist to make sure that they were doing the job the way that the old receptionist did. Or we'd reinstitute our old PPC campaign, or we'd send out the mail we used to send out. Whatever it was we were doing before, we would do it again. And we would look for where that change occurred, because as he says, the change would occur, he says, just before it. We're looking just before it. So statistics going up, or it's kind of humming along, then crash. We're going just before that. What did we change? Now, funny thing about this, okay, because this has gotten me out of a ton of jams, is I've sometimes sent people off to go, okay, look at what happened. You see a stats crash. Go look at what happened right before this. What did we change? And someone will come back, oh, we didn't change anything. And inevitably, every time I look, I find something, invariably, especially when things drop. So again, when would we apply this, though? Because we're going over two tools here. He says specifically when statistics change radically for better or for worse. You could also have, let's say you're collecting on average, 80, 90,000 a month, and all of a sudden you're collecting 170. Well, I'd want to find out what caused that, wouldn't you? Unless it was something ridiculous. You're on some type of an insurance plan where they were holding payments for 2 quarters, and all of a sudden you got this big, massive payment. Okay, fine. That's not going to happen every month. But let's say it's just a sudden change. Well, then you'd want to find out what made the stat go up. And, again, I've seen people where this happens, their stats shoot up all of a sudden. You go, well, what did you do? What's different? And they go, I don't know. I mean, that's just as bad as when stats crash, not knowing why they went down. You want to know what's behind these things, because obviously if you did something and statistics shot up all of a sudden, you'd want to continue to do that something to keep your statistics going up. So that's the first thing, monitoring change. Another thing that you'd want to do, he says a little bit more in this reference. I just want to read this to you because this is kind of interesting. He says, it is change that changes things for better or for worse. That's the simplicity of this natural law. If you want to hold a constant condition, don't change anything. If you're trying to improve something, make changes cautiously. Okay, so I'm going to interject myself in here for a second. I'm going to pause here. I'm reading this quote from Mr. Hubbard. And let's just take this last line and let it sink in for a second. If you're trying to improve something, make changes cautiously. So let's say things are going well, but you want them to go even more well, right? You want it to get better. And sometimes we all get into this, a little bit of a FOMO, fear of missing out. Okay, we're going to do this. We're going to add this. We're going to change this, even though things are actually doing okay. Well, you don't want to take a scene that's going great. Let's say you have a great staff, great personnel, and you go, well, gosh, if I switch this person to treatment coordinator, this person over here, and I move this person over there, it would just be so much better. Well, watch out for that, because now you're taking a scene that's doing well and functioning and you're making drastic change to it. You're not being cautious. And don't be shocked if things start to go south on you and crash. So as he says here, make changes cautiously. And he goes on. This is Mr. Hubbard again. And keep a record of what is changed. Then you watch statistics, and if they decline, you hastily wipe out the last change. And if they improve, you reinforce the change that began it. So this makes life really simple. You do a personnel switch, look what happens to the stats, and keep a log somewhere, a changes log. You could keep it in a Word doc or a spreadsheet, or if you have some type of statistic management software, keep it in there so that you can see when you go back, you can look at the personnel shifts that you did or when you made a major shift in your marketing, because those are the changes that are going to make things better or worse. Or okay, so you want to make sure you know what those are. If they made things better, we're going to reinforce them. If they made things worse, we're going to switch things back quickly to revert it back to the old scene. As I said, that in and of itself has gotten me out of a ton of jams, just monitoring change. So let's move on to this next tool, which is the cycle of production. Now, I'm going to use this tool in any number of instances. Usually when I want to increase productivity at an area, maybe stats aren't where I'd want them to be, maybe stats are a little lower than I'd like and I can't determine what's behind it, or maybe they're just in an unsatisfactory level and they've been there for a while. It's not like a change created a good scene into a bad scene. Just things aren't where I want them to be. And maybe I'm doing a few things and it's not improving the scene, and maybe I want to increase my new patients, or I want to increase the amount of collections in the practice, or something of that nature, or I want to hire more staff, or something along these lines, and I can't seem to get those things to work. This is where I'm going to use this cycle of production. I'm going to analyze it using the cycle of production. So what is the cycle of production? Well, in order to understand the cycle of production, you first have to understand what a product is. Now, I've shared Mr. Hubbard's definition of a product in episodes before, usually having to do with hiring. You can also use this with staff or staff productivity or staff training. But we're going to use it in this context now. So let me give you this definition again if you've never heard it before. It's the definition of a product. So definition 1 is a completed thing that has exchange value within or outside the activity. Definition 1 of a product. So I'm holding a pen right now, where I've got this microphone in front of me. That's a product. It had exchange value outside the activity. This is a Shure mic, I believe, or an AKC mic. So AKC makes this mic, they produce it, and MGE buys this mic from them. It has exchange value, so therefore it's a product, okay? Simple definition. So this is a more expansive definition, definition 2. A product is a finished, high-quality service or article in the hands of the being or group it serves as an exchange for a valuable. That's a product. So let's unpack this for a second. So what's this definition? A finished high-quality service or article. So it could be a service or a thing. We have this mic I'm using, or let's say you did a crown on a patient yesterday. Okay, you're probably listening to this on a Monday, in which case you probably didn't do one last week. You did a crown on a patient last week, and you delivered that crown and it fit perfectly. That's a finished, high-quality service. And then it has a couple other conditions that a product has to satisfy. It's a finished, high-quality service or article in the hands of the being or group it serves. That's the second condition. As an exchange for a valuable is the third condition. So if you did that crown on a patient, you've satisfied the first two conditions. It's a finished high-quality service in the hands, or in this case, in the mouth of the being it serves, but then they didn't pay you, let's say. Well, you did not receive a valuable in exchange for this service that you provided, therefore it's not a product. If I'm Ford and I make a bunch of cars, and if you remember during the pandemic there was a shortage of chips, I make a bunch of cars and they're sitting on a lot and they're not completed, that's not a product, it's incomplete, you see. Or let's say I had a bunch of completed cars and they're sitting on a car lot not being sold. They're not in the hands of the being or group it serves, that's not a product. Or someone takes a car and they're not making the payments, I'm not receiving a valuable in exchange, that's not a product. And what's interesting is if you were to ask any of your employees, because this is usually the context I use this in, what their product is, you'll get a lot of different answers. You'll get answers like, well, I answer the phone, I help patients, I check patients out. That's not a finished high-quality service or article in exchange for a valuable, is it? And to add to that, in the hands of the being or group it serves. So if I'm your schedule coordinator, what would be my product? Well, I might have small products, patients. I would have patients that show up on the schedule when they're supposed to be scheduled for the correct amount of time at the proper place on the schedule. Now I give that to you. That's a finished high quality service. Here's this person. I receive pay in exchange for that. You see? So you receive the patient, I got paid. Or I produce an overall schedule for the month. Here's a super productive schedule scheduled properly. In exchange for that, I get paid and I get to be part of the team. So that's the overall deliverable that I'm giving to you. Sometimes people use that term, deliverable, or the thing that I actually make or produce. Not what I do all day, but what's my result? Not necessarily what I do, because I've seen people do stuff all day and not produce anything. We've all seen this. You could put somebody on the phone, and let's say I hired somebody and I want them to do a reactivation. Let's say it's a newer employee, and I don't want to put them on my reception, answering my phones because they don't know what's going on, but I want to see, can this person produce it all? So I go, cool, I'm going to teach you how to reactivate patients because that's very easy. Teach them how to use the software very briefly, tell them what to look for when you're making a phone call, what type of appointment that you're going to be scheduling them for, whether it's a 1-hour new initial because they haven't been in for a few years, or they're just coming in for a 6-month recall, or whatever it might be, and how long that takes and how to put it in the book. And I teach them how to do this. And I go, good, here's the list. Start calling. And I teach them the basic stuff. Look at how old they are. So you're not calling a kid, you're calling the parent, right? And I put them on the phone. So let's say this person makes 150 phone calls a day. They look very busy, but they schedule nobody. How useful is that to you? It's not useful at all. Why am I having them on the phone? I'm having them on the phone to get patients back into the office. If they get a bunch of people on the schedule, you might go, great, well, that's a product. They scheduled a bunch of people. Well, they're not a product until they show up. Once they show up, they're a product. Now, obviously, they have to be scheduled before they show up. But if they schedule 100 people and 5 show up, that's not great, is it? That isn't the ultimate reason I put them on the phones. So ideally, you want people to be oriented towards what their product is for their job. We go over this in several different places. I think I did an episode on this a while back. Sorry, I'm either getting old or I've done a decent amount of episodes. I'm forgetting now. I know that we have a little team building session on our online platform, DDS Success, where I cover this a little bit. It's something that you can watch with your whole team so everybody can kind of figure out what their product is. It actually makes the job a lot easier because people get very fixated on what they're doing all day long as opposed to what it is that they're actually supposed to be producing. Anyway, so let's go back to this cycle of production. So you understand what a product is now. Okay, so if I'm looking at an area that I'm not getting enough product, I'm going to use the cycle of production to figure out what I need to change in order to do that. So let's say we're taking new patients as an example. If the product is a new patient sitting in your chair, that's the end product. Boom, new patient in the office. They filled out their intake paperwork and there they are. That's the product. Or maybe a morning that is properly scheduled with productive primary procedures. You want to do $6,000 every morning or $8,000 every morning. That's the product. Okay, and you want more though, let's say. Well, what I would want to do is using the cycle of production, I would want to figure out, I'd walk this thing backwards. I'd figure out what steps were involved in creating this final product, or as Mr. Hubbard would call them, what were the sub-products, sub meaning under, beneath, below. What were the sub-products that were involved in creating this product? And I'll give you some examples of this, but let's say, for example, something stupid. Let's say it's too warm in this room right now where I'm podcasting. It's not, but let's say it is. So the product is I want the thermostat turned down. So how am I going to get the thermostat turned down? Am I going to yell at the thermostat? No, I'm going to get up. I'm going to walk over to the thermostat. I'm going to press the button to lower the temperature, and then the AC will kick on, and then the room will become cooler, which is the product I was going for. So all of those steps involved in getting the room cooler, including me getting up and walking over there, were sub-products. Do you see? Or a cup of coffee. I have a cup of coffee in front of me right now. What were the sub-products involved in making that cup of coffee? Well, we first had to have coffee. We had to have somewhere to make the coffee. We had to have a cup to put the coffee in. The coffee had to be brewed. The coffee was put in the cup was closed, and I have a cup of coffee. Those are the things involved in making the coffee. So if we take a new patient and we walk it backwards, let's take a look at that. And then we can take a look at where we may be having problems on our new patient line, or where we can expand on our new patient line in order to get more new patients. So if the new patient is the final product, and I'm not trying to say that a patient is a product, but you're getting the idea. This is the end result, the deliverable that we wanted. Well, what had to happen before they actually came into the practice? Well, they had to be confirmed, but in order to be confirmed, they had to be scheduled. In order to be scheduled, they had to call in. In order to call in, they had to have a reason to call. They received some marketing. They found me via my SEO when they looked for dentists near me. They had to get referred to the practice. In other words, they needed to be a lead. So it started with a lead, which then called into my practice. Whoever handled the phone call converted this person into a patient, got them on the schedule. We confirmed them and they showed up. So if I want more people in the chair, I need to do more of those other things to create more of the final product, which is more people in the chair. I can't just walk up to my schedule coordinator and go, get more new patients. That isn't the solution. So by tracking backwards and looking at each step, I can work out how to increase more of the final product that I want. And since we're talking new patients, let's use this as our example. I can do this in two ways. One, by eliminating loss on the cycle of production itself, and two, increasing the amount of input at the beginning of the cycle of production, which in this case with new patients would be new patient leads, people clicking my ad or calling my office. I'd get more phone calls, or if it was an implant funnel, more implant leads. That would be one way, and the other way would be eliminating the loss along the cycle of production. So let's walk through each of these. So let's say I walk it backwards and I find out, as I'm looking at my receptionist, I see that I look at the number of new patient calls that came in and I analyze them and I see that we got 120 calls last month and they only converted 40 of them, so roughly a third. Okay, so we got 120 calls, they converted 40. Well, I know that number should be higher. And I can tell you, if you know it should be higher, I can confirm that to you. It should be much higher, it should be closer to 75%. So if that were the case, I'd be getting, almost 100 new patients a month. So then if I know that it should be higher, I would take a look at why am I not converting more new patients? Well, I'd listen to the calls. Is there anything that I need to correct with my receptionist? Maybe there is. Okay, maybe they are not asking the correct questions, or maybe they're blowing patients off that they shouldn't be blowing off, like shoppers. They get irritated with shoppers that call in. Or I might find as I listen to this call, I see my receptionist is putting somebody on hold continuously. And then I find out that the reason they're putting people on hold continuously and losing the call is because they're having to check a patient out and another phone call's coming in while they're handling a new patient call. So there's nothing wrong with their skill set, so to speak, but it has to do with the workload that they have. So by addressing the correct reason that my conversions are low, and that will become evident when you actually just go look and listen, you would increase your conversion rate. If I can increase the conversion rate, I end up with more patients on the schedule. Hence, I end up with more new patients. All right. You might find something even silly about confirmations. Let's say you're getting, as you walk, this is why I added confirmations as part of this cycle of production. Let's say you're scheduling 60 new patients, but only 40 are showing up. So then it's not as bad of a conversion issue at the front desk if there was 120 phone calls, but you're losing 20 in confirmations. So I'd look into my confirmations and go, what's going on with my confirmations? First, I'd want to know, well, was it ever good? Was our show rate ever good? And maybe it wasn't. I've had that happen to me before where I go, gosh, the show rate in this area is really low. Well, was it high before? Because, I'm looking for that change factor, right? Did we change something? It's like, no, the show rate's always been bad. In which case, I have to have a bright idea and figure out how to get the show rate to improve. You might find that your show rate used to be better and then you switched over to doing everything digitally. You're just texting new patients to confirm them, which, by the way, I would never do. I would want to speak with a new patient. Patient of record who comes regularly, fine, text them. New patient, you call. Okay, that's just silly not to call a new patient. You want to verbally hear them say, yes, I'm coming. So you fix that. Conversion rate goes up. I had a client who fixed their new patient no-shows by calling them himself the night before the appointment. His no-shows were horrible. Once he started doing that, they went away almost completely because he spoke to them himself the night before the appointment. Hey, this is Dr. So-and-so. Just wanted to see, I have you on the schedule tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Looking forward to meeting you. Just want to see if you had any questions for me before you arrived. Patients were blown away that he was personally calling them, and his no-show rate went to nothing. The point being is, by fixing that, we're reducing or eliminating the loss on the cycle of production itself from scheduling to showing up. Or in the case of conversions, we're taking the loss that we had with a lot of leads, less scheduling. By improving conversion, we're eliminating the amount of loss. You might also find that you have a lot of leads coming in, but let's say a ton of leads are coming in when nobody's there. I've seen that happen before. You look after hours, and this is something people very rarely track, because let's say you have an answering service, you have people calling in at night. Answering services, I don't care which one it is, they may be really nice and really good. They're not like calling the office. and they're usually very unhelpful unless the patient has an emergency. Call back tomorrow. Like, okay, fine. Right? But I would want to monitor. Let's say you're getting new patient calls, you're getting 5, 6 new patient calls an evening. I've seen this happen before. Well, then you might have a deal where you work it out with a couple of your staff where they have remote access to your software. You pay them a couple extra bucks. You can kind of do it round robin with different staff in the office that can schedule, maybe your office manager and an assistant and your front desk and whomever. And they have if you have Mango or Weave or whatever. This is easy to do with cell phones, but they just have the call forwarded to their cell phone and just schedule the patient. One night a week, this is what they do. Then all of a sudden, these leads that you were losing because you weren't there to get, you're already getting the leads. Now you're actually taking advantage of them. That's another way you might eliminate loss. So that's one thing you might do in order to increase your new patients, to eliminate the loss. The other thing you can do is increase the amount of input at the front end. So in this example, we're getting 120 calls, but we're only scheduling 40 new patients a month. So you might go through this and by handling your conversion, your confirmation, and these calls that were coming in after hours, just with those 120 leads you were already getting, you might get your new patients up to 80 or 90, and you go, you know what, I'm happy with that. I don't need any more. Fine, you're done. Okay? Or you may go, gosh, I want more. I want 160 new patients a month. Okay, well, then you're going to need more than 120 leads. So then you're going to have to increase the amount of leads coming in. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I'm just going to go over 2 scenarios here with you just to think with. If I increase the number of incoming calls, let's say I've handled the conversion first. So it's sort of like maybe a bad analogy, but it's sort of like making sure that you're using all the food that you've bought. You're not throwing anything away, and the other one's buying more food. Okay? Again, I'm not trying to compare practices and new patients or whatever to food. I'm just trying to come up with an analogy. It was the first thing that came to mind. You're not wasting, okay? The other is getting more input, more leads coming in. So assuming that I've maximized the amount of traffic I have coming in, I'm doing a good job on conversion, I'm doing a good job on confirmations, and we're not missing new patient calls, and people are getting called back right away, and et cetera. Now I'm ready to increase the amount of calls coming in. Well, I'm going to want to make sure that I'm able to handle those calls. I also want to make sure at the practice end, because it doesn't end with the new patient just showing up in your practice, which I'll talk about in a second, but I want to make sure that I'm able to handle that as well. So before I go add 40 or 50 new calls or leads coming in per month, I want to make sure that I'm competently handling the 120 that I'm getting and that I'm able to handle those other 40 or 50 calls. Because if all of a sudden I start getting 160 calls and the front desk becomes overwhelmed, instead of seeing a new patient increase of 30 or 40 a month, I might see a new patient increase of only 10. Because now the receptionist only has 5 minutes to spend on the phone with a new patient, whereas before they had 8. It's just getting through. In other words, I want to make sure that I can adequately handle these incoming calls, and I'm set up organizationally to do it, because it isn't just a matter of creating more people calling in on the phone. Now, on the flip side of all this, let's say I do some work here, and I made my cycle of production more efficient, and my conversions went up. So instead of getting 40 new patients a month, I'm now getting 80. Instead of converting only a third, I'm converting 2/3. Now I'm getting a ton of new patients in, and the office is very busy. But I noticed that my production hasn't gone up very much. I wonder, well, gosh, what's going on? Well, in that case, you've overwhelmed the schedule a little bit. So let's say, for example, new patients come in, whether they come in via hygiene or they see you as the owner doctor, it really doesn't matter if you're a GP. You're going to end up having to do an exam either way. But you might find now you have so many new patients coming in that you don't have the amount of time that you used to spend with the 40 that you got per month before. With this 80 that you're seeing now, you don't have as much time to do a really thorough initial oral exam and do everything that you did before. And even worse, you don't have time to actually spend with the patient to explain what's really going on. So you're diagnosing a ton more treatment, but your sales time has not increased because your time hasn't increased. You've just gotten busier, so you're spending less time explaining treatment to patients. Therefore, your treatment acceptance is starting to drop. So you're going to want to make sure that if you do this, I wouldn't wait to maximize or make things more efficient before I did that. I would still do that, but I would want to be ready for that next problem because I'm going to have to work out, okay, well, how do I sort this out so I'm not losing all these opportunities? It may be a matter of redoing your schedule a bit. You might need an associate. Depends on your situation, and that's something we can always help you out with. So that's the basic idea on how to handle the cycle of production. You do the same thing with sales. My schedule's not busy. Well, again, how does your schedule get busy if you're a doctor? Well, you have to have treatment on the schedule. Where does treatment come from? You have to present the treatment to patients and they have to accept it. In order to present it, you have to diagnose it. In order to diagnose it, they have to be in the practice. You can follow this back and you'll find one of these areas aren't functioning. Maybe the presentations are happening and patients aren't closing. Or you're not seeing a lot of patients with outstanding treatment because you've allowed your patient base to go inactive and the only patients on hygiene are patients that are very compliant, in which case you've done most of their treatment. There could be a problem at any one of these points. You could apply this whole thing to hiring even. You're trying to hire people and you can't figure out why you're not hiring people. Well, okay, if the product is a hired person who's been onboarded in your practice, look at the steps that have to happen before that, and that's where you'll start to find issues. I've done this a lot. I'll sit down with somebody, we'll do that, and find out, oh, well, yeah, you're getting all these applications, you're not calling them for 3 weeks. It's usually not, this isn't, when you find out what's really going on, it's not some complex, strange thing. It's usually pretty basic, is, I guess, what I would say. It's very, very easy to diagnose what's going on, okay, when you take the cycle back. The last thing I will say about this is at times when you start doing this, it's not always happy and fun. It's not just, oh my gosh, my receptionist needs to be trained better, or golly, it'd be great if we could just work a little harder in this area or answer the phones at night. You might find that you have a staff member that doesn't belong on your team. They're blowing off new patient calls, or they're upsetting patients, or they're not answering the phone, or they're taking 2 weeks to call an applicant. And you got to be ready for that as well because, again, it's a break in that cycle of production, and that break is just happening because the person that you have on the job is willfully non-performing. In any event, doing this at least leads to the real issue that you can actually do something about, which puts you more in control of your practice and the overall scene. And it makes why things aren't working or are working less of a mystery and more of a routine matter or problem that you can actually fix. And so there you have it. You have those two tools. Try them out and let me know how it goes. If you have any questions as you go through this, you can always email me at jeffb@mgeonline.com. And if you want to know more about MGE, you can find out more about us at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. Folks, I do hope this helps. Have a great week, and we'll see you at the next episode.